Good day, shale players, and thank you for joining Hart Energy's Doug Permian, Doug Eagle Ford 2020 conference, where we feature two great basins in one great virtual conference. I am Richard Mason, Chief Technical Director at Hart Energy, and you are viewing session 1.14, or our technical panel. The topic is efficiently producing cash flow. Now, this is a roundtable format. We have with us two speakers, Kayleigh Kennedy, who's the Permian Basin Engineering Manager for Completions and Well Intervention at Baker Hughes Company. And we also have Will Cauley, Regional Services Delivery Technical Manager for Baker Hughes as well. Now, we invite you to visit the Doug Permian, Doug Eagle Ford website for extended biographies on both of our capable participants. Kayleigh, Will, welcome to the panel.
Thanks for having us. And to start things out, I just want to talk about, we know 2020 has really been unprecedented. It's really an understatement for our industry. And so the challenge here is understanding what the supply and demand is going forward for our industry. There's still a lot of uncertainty around that with additional COVID outbreaks and lockdowns, OPEC plus production curtailments. And so we really are challenged to understand how is that going to impact our 2021 going forward. And so investors are really pulling back and requiring us to be free cash flow positive and pulling back CapEx that they're allowing us to spend. And so I anticipate we'll see CapEx for 21 similar to what we've seen the second half of this year, 2020. And so with that being said, we wanted to discuss really what we see for the future in 2021 with respect to production optimization, production enhancement, some of the things that we see new to the industry, and also some products and services that maybe we can provide to help with minimizing CapEx and OPEX to go forward for 2021 and reach those targets.
It's absolutely the name of the game there. And you bring up an interesting point, and that is we hear so much about well cost savings, reduction in well cost. And it's hard to get a feel for how much of that is just service cost based versus process based. So the process is permanent, right? And that's what we want. The service, the costs are down now, but when demand comes back, service costs are going to go up. And does that account for 60% of the savings we're seeing currently? I mean, how it's hard to tell at this current state, but how do you see that playing out as we go forward?
Yeah, I think the key is efficiencies. Right, efficiencies and productivity. And that's really where, some of the other technologies that we can talk about here are going to play a key factor, is making sure that you put your money to work and become more efficient at what we're doing.
And that leads us, Kayleigh, I wonder if you might give us some insight as a field manager out in the Permian Basin. How are operators responding to the current downturn? How are they changing their practices other than spending less? But what do you see from a practical standpoint that operators are doing to adapt?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and thanks again for having us today. So looking at the Permian Basin and just North America land as a whole, the industry's had to adapt globally, and I think in every industry we've had to adapt, but we're certainly seeing it in the oil field with the downturn combined with the pandemic. And our customers and our operators are having to, there's various things they're having to do. They have to restructure their debt, there's mergers and acquisitions, and they're accepting hedges at less desirable terms. But what we are seeing is an increase in DUC inventory. So we know that they're not completing all those wells this year. They're seeing that it's not economical to complete all of them, and they're really focusing their efforts into those wells that they do think are viable. They're obviously changing as well their completions programs. So we're seeing for instance, larger spacing, and that's something that our operators have been doing for some time. But with that being said, what does that mean? And with larger spacing, we're talking less wireline runs, longer treatment times, and less transition times. And that's typically when things go wrong. That transition time's your downtime. So we're seeing that our operators are honed in and very focused not just on NPT hours but the minutes. And at Baker Hughes we're very focused in on reliability, and we understand that any downtime is obviously a financial impact to the customer. So I'll pick an example, but for drill outs, for instance, we're doing single trip drill outs, and operators have been working towards that for some time now. So they're not performing short trips. Well, short trips were done to help clean out, ensure we've got a sufficient clean out, but also to help with changing out components in the BHA. They didn't think the bits could get us, 60 plugs plus, or they may have felt that they needed to change out components in the BHA because we're having, some reliability issues. Well, now we know that we're doing these single trips, and we have, a portfolio of tools that we've worked on for years, and we really focus in on the technology there and the reliability piece. But we know that the technology is not enough. We need to make sure that from a pre-job planning standpoint that we as an engineering group are focused on that, and that's where some of our software technology comes in, Circa software. So we know that partnering the technology with that piece and looking at TFA and understanding that we can get to bottom, and then also partnering that with our solids transport model and making sure that we have the flow rate required to clean out the wellbore. And from there we optimise that BHA. We know that operators are stabilising on their lateral lengths, so they might not be as concerned with going that extra mile, but what's key is that from a reliability standpoint you select the right BHA, because that is going to save the time and money going forward, right? And our portfolio is, we've seen us successfully and consistently complete drill outs in the Permian Basin in some of the most challenging well bores. We've seen 26,600 feet plus, and we've seen well bores that from a well bore geometry standpoint look like a horseshoe, and we're doing that consistently and successfully.
Yeah, so for a long time, the Midland Basin in particular, but the Delaware Basin coming closer, roughly 10,000 foot was the kind of standard. And then we hear that now we're trying to push out to 3 miles or 15,000 feet. I guess that's the practical limit many times. You can go further. They've done that in the Marcellus, but it seems like the risk factor goes up enormously. So you mentioned the stabilization in lateral length. Also, for a long time, we were reducing the footage or the spacing on stages. And yet now it seems like that's relaxed and it's going the other way. Is that right? And then in exchange, we're just doing more clusters. Is that a correct interpretation of what's happening out there that you all are seeing?
Yep, that's absolutely correct. And I think what the operators are seeing is that by increasing that stage length and the number of clusters, the productive time from pumping hours outweighs the risk of shortening the stages, having all these transition times, and overall their production is not necessarily there's not a huge difference between the two. So the operational efficiencies are what's key, and that's what's driving this.
I wonder, Kayleigh, if we might pivot off that just a little bit. We talk about the shale cycle, right? Discovery, delineation, optimization, and then harvest, the golden grail, holy grail that we're all trying to get to on that. And we've seen largely that the industry, of course, is going to be in different phases. Delaware is probably still on the optimization side, but Midland, probably full field harvest. We've seen some experiments with these mega pads, right? 28, 30 wells in a geographic unit that may be a mile square or whatever. And yet it seems that those early attempts, both in the Permian and then also in the Mid-Continent, have not worked out the way operators originally envisioned. So I guess what I'm asking is this: we thought when we got to full field development, we had arrived. But what we're finding out is that we have to go through the reiterations and learn how best to do that going forward. Are mega pads really the way of the future out there, do you think? Or are people going to come back to kind of a mid-range, maybe 6, maybe 10, maybe 12 wells on a pad? How do you see that evolving?
I think that's a great question, and if I'm honest, in the current market, I think we will not see as much of that. It definitely was a trial and error phase, and we've seen operators in the Permian and Midland do that. But really, if we focus on what pad drilling or completions in production is that you're gaining operational efficiencies from that, right? We're batch drilling, we're batch completing. And that's key for our operators. So we will continue to see pads, but I'm not sure in the current climate we're going to see these mega pads. I think our operators are still trying to understand the efficiency gains versus the spacing and how that's affecting our production. And I'm not sure that the production gain is worth the mega pads at this point. But again, the technology piece is key. So we know that parent-child relationship is something that everybody's focused in on, but how are each of our operators actually gaining that information? And we're seeing more and more downhole gauges being installed, so our SureSense portfolio, and that is allowing our operators to see real-time data from, the parent well to the child well when they frack. And I think that's what's key, and that will be key technology going forward for our operators to really collect data and make a decision on whether they want to up the number of wells within a given pad.
So in the past, the issue has been you could put sensors down the well, but it added substantially to well cost. Have we been able to reduce the cost of doing things like fiber optic or other types of sensors to figure out how a particular stage is impacting wells next door or, each stage along the line?
So I think, there's always going to be that upfront cost of that technology, but I'm sure we'll speak to this more in our discussion, but what Baker's doing from a internal business transformation model and really focusing on our supply chain and whatnot, I think that cost is coming down, and there's certainly a place for it in this market, even in these conditions, because really what is coming from that is the data piece, and that's critical for us to move forward in this current environment. We don't want to have to keep trying things like trial and error. We want to actually get hard data that we can use and make educated decisions on what we're going to do going forward on our pads and how close we're going to position wells and spacing and so on and so forth.
And that kind of leads to the evolution of service companies themselves, because in the past, the service company provided not just the iron, but provided the sand, provided the chemicals and other well inputs. And you could keep the cost really for the iron down by gaining some EBITDA operating off of the ancillaries that were provided. Well, now operators are self-sourcing that themselves. And just providing the iron, and I know you all aren't in the pressure pumping business per se, on the iron side of it, that's a tough way to make a living, is, just whatever margin you can get off of that. How do you see the service companies, and particularly the major service companies, evolving then from this old model that had worked for 15 years or more in the shale play to kind of a new model where maybe you become partners with E&P in terms of the technical capabilities that you can provide? How does the big service companies in particular evolve in this environment?
So for Baker Hughes specifically, and I think that's a great question, we are not only adapting, the E&Ps are adapting as well. Our operators are having to adjust, restructure their companies. And I think a lot of operators are not always clued up on exactly what products and services we've got. We have an extensive portfolio, and reservoir technical services is something that we offer, and that group has extensive experience in petrophysics, reservoir engineering, geology, and that group work closely across the product lines within OFS. So that's completions and well intervention, drilling services, to work with our operators to look at not just a well-to-well basis, but a large set of data and come up with a plan for production enhancement on a certain area where we've got underperforming wells. Does it need to be a chemical treatment or a refrac, or they're helping with well positioning and so on and so forth. So we have a group that's dedicated to that works internally for us, assisting across the product lines and how we can help our operators, but also as a service for our customers that will help them navigate this current market.
Yeah, Will, any observations on that? I mean, in a sense, you're becoming a partner with the E&P company, but you're bringing to the table engineering expertise, data management expertise, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are many different types of service companies out there, right? And so there are some that are providing some of these pass-through products that you talked about, and I think those are really going to be challenged. Those business models are going to be challenged in the near term and in the future. But when you look at the full service oilfield service companies, the big major ones, I think that we really, and especially Baker Hughes, we focus on technology and partnering with the operators to bring that technology to market. And so I think that some of our best examples of bringing technology have been because we partnered with an operator and they said, we have this problem, can you help us? So whether it's a new size of an existing type of product, with liner hanger or liner top packer, or is it, some type of cementing accessory equipment. There's been operators in the Permian that we've partnered with to come up with solutions where they felt that maybe their existing solution wasn't providing the reliability that they expected and they wanted. And so I think really you'll see more of those partnerships going forward together to say, how can you help us? How can it be a win-win for both of us?
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a democratizing influence, right? So you would expect Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil to have all this in their research and development. They can do that themselves, but yet you look at the Permian, you've got a lot of small, mid-caps, and private operators who may not have those staffs or that resource are able to invest in it. You all can provide that service, the latest and the greatest, going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really do have groups that Kayleigh mentioned, the RTS group. So this is essentially a reservoir team that can do modeling. That if you have a private equity that doesn't have a full staff, you may just have an operations lead. And so those types of services that they may not know about that Baker has, and those are some of the things that we see in the future being utilized for some of these smaller companies. And
that's the value add, so that's where the revenue comes from as Baker Hughes goes forward in this brave new world?
Yeah, absolutely. Just for that specific case, yeah, that's the value add. So,
the other thing that comes up quite a bit is the data analytics piece of things, and you may get tired of hearing this, but it's kind of like Mark Twain. Everybody talks about the weather, but it seems like few are really doing anything about it. And I get that impression that that's how data management is in oil and gas. If you think of the history of oil and gas, we've been the first at big data. I mean, seismic work, that's an enormous amount of information, and that's 50 years or more old. And yet here we are in this grand new technological era that we're living in, and oil and gas seems a little slow on the uptake. What are you seeing out there? Where are we in the learning curve on data management?
Yeah, so I think it kind of comes in waves, right? And I think that maybe on the seismic side, that was groundbreaking, but we've probably kind of been in a lull for a while. And so with artificial intelligence and big data now, I think we're really just scratching the surface. So we just mentioned, we as an industry record tons of data, but what do we do with it? We typically just store it away, and maybe one person knows about it, and they're the only one that might be able to recollect, hey, I had a learning, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I'm going to apply it to this new project I have, this new well I have. So really where we're going here is now we have a way to connect all of this data, both old in the past and new as we move forward, and make decisions based off of that. So one example, joint venture Avitas, right? So this is a joint venture with a company that does methane detection. So we use drones in the Permian that are equipped with sensors and software and cameras that can detect methane emissions and leaks. And so this allows us to detect them quickly, mitigate them quickly, and then the software is also on a learning platform. So it can actually learn the cycles of, hey, this particular area, this particular, customer has had leaks at this because of this, and this. We can actually do preventative maintenance and go in and say, you need to, retool, work on some of these facilities before we have a leak. We anticipate one's going to come up. So you can really use this AI learning for predictive maintenance. And then the other example I wanted to mention was our partnership with artificial intelligence company C3 AI. And so one of the first products that they've released is a software that is specifically for production optimization. And so what this does is it takes it's a system of systems. It takes all of the systems that are currently existing, production numbers from existing fields, and then future spacing, all this stuff, and it'll give you actual insights on how to optimize. It can tell you, from an injection standpoint, injection wells, how do you need to space those, and so ultimately the point is to increase production, reduce CapEx and OpEx, increase safety. That's a huge part of this digital revolution. Is you have a lot less people on locations. You have a lot less people on the roads. And so not only does it affect, preventing people from getting hurt, but a lot of this is energy transition and getting into reducing your carbon emissions and helping, we have carbon emission reduction targets, but also operators do as well. There's regulation that's being put in, there's tax incentive that's there. So a lot of this has to do with reducing carbon footprint as well.
Yeah, ESG certainly is the name of the game from the financial industry side of things, but it's significant because that's where the money comes from, obviously, to do things. On the data management piece, what are some of the near-term barriers that are holding us back from moving forward? Sometimes I wonder if it's cultural, so young people selling machine learning, artificial intelligence, all excited about those buzz terms, and they do wonderful things. And yet they're selling it to someone like me who, I vaguely remember buying a PlayStation for my kid, all I'm interested in is how can I shave out 10 minutes and reduce my cost by 100,000, So there's a generation gap, and then there's an understanding or communications gap. One's selling the sizzle, but I'm wanting to talk about the steak as the vendor. I mean, is that what you perceive as the hurdle that we have to get over, is to bring all those together?
I think somewhat there's that hurdle. Everybody has their individual goals and targets, right? So if I'm in drilling, if I'm in completions, if I'm in production, I've got my individual targets. And I think the industry as a whole has been reluctant to change, especially now when everything is so cost conscious. It's perceived as why change it if it isn't broke? Why fix it if it isn't broke, right? Why take a risk? Because a risk equals more cost, and increased cost is more visible than ever. So I think it's definitely the service providers to make sure it's our responsibility to make sure we communicate to all levels of the operator's organization about really how these new digital platforms can enhance their goals. And a lot of times they really do bridge between drilling, completion, and production. So we have to make sure that we communicate effectively, that instead of one person saying, a decision maker saying, what's in it for me, how is that going to save me money? Well, it may not affect you, it may increase your budget, but when you look at the return on investment of the entire well, now we're talking there's going to be a huge impact of savings. And so we have to make sure that we communicate that all of these different functions are going to be, the value chain of these digital projects is going to bridge all these different functions.
Yeah, because ultimately you talk to the drilling manager, what does he want? I want to get from A to B as quickly as I can. Okay, but the well's a corkscrew. Then you talk to the completions guy, and he wants the high IP for the IR department there. He blows the hell out of it, And then you talk to the poor production manager, and he's got to live with those issues for the next 10 years. So if there's a way, then you can produce the perfect well for the production manager, and that kind of is a long way of leading into my question is, we've always been focused kind of on the sexy parts of drilling and completion, with with data management and so on, but you also have a production piece as well. I was just wondering where the low-hanging fruit and the greatest potential value for this lies. Certainly drilling, yes, but that's almost a one-time event. Completion sets you up, but ultimately production is where you make the money. And I'm just curious, this digital revolution, with our focus on drilling and completion, maybe we're missing perhaps the greatest opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the production is the biggest piece. And you can see that with a lot of our products that we're releasing through our digital transformation are geared towards production enhancement, production optimization, and making those decisions. So, whether it's the reservoir team or whether it's the C3 AI product, where it's its first product that it released is for production optimization. I think that's the key, because over time you can shorten the return on investment cycle with minimal investment on an existing well that has a production decline. If you can increase it through a treatment of some kind, whether it's chemicals or gas lift or artificial lift, all these options. If you can change that and optimize those are small investments relative to the entire well that really can impact the production significantly.
So Kayleigh, completions, reservoir engineering, we've dealt an entire generation, 40 years or more, with physics-based modeling, right? And it's gotten us 9% recovery. And yet data management comes in and it's sort of a black box, I mean, if I'm an engineer, I want to understand, I don't want to know, start at A and here's E and here are the correlations. I want to know A to B to C to D to E. So it's, the data approach seems completely antithetical to our long culture of how we've been producing reservoirs over time. Is that going to take a generation change for people to adapt to that, or just how do we overcome that barrier, that innate, natural engineering skepticism that we're doing things differently? I understand physics-based modeling. I don't understand the black box correlation deal. If I wear a blue shirt on Tuesday, well, we get a better well. What's up with that? But
yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, if we look at the world around us and what it's doing digitally, we're behind we're behind the curve, we're behind the 8 ball, and we all have iPhones and we all have this technology that is capturing a lot of data about us, and we maybe don't see exactly what it's doing for us long term. It might give us an ad now and again that's exactly what we were looking for because we were talking about it or we were scrolling for something, whatever it may be. But from an oil and gas perspective, we need to adopt this technology, and we feel that it's a service company's. The responsibility lies with us as a service company to adopt this technology, develop it, and work with our operators on it, because that's what's going to be key to really understanding the big picture quickly and for the long term. If we continue to do what we've always done in this current market, we're going to struggle. And there's a lot of data out there, and we're not trying to take away from the human aspect of it. What we want to know is AI can help us identify different paths and different KPIs we weren't looking at before. And the technology, it teaches itself and it learns. It's very complex, and I won't pretend to be an expert on AI itself, but what it can do for oil and gas is take all of that data, the 40 years worth of data we've got, and make correlations that we were maybe missing in the past. And it will take engineers and teams of completions, drilling and production engineers to really work with this technology to iron out bugs and to really complete the bigger picture. But I think we do need to adopt it, and it is the future, and it's definitely a huge focus for Baker Hughes and our energy transition.
I think real quick, I wanted to say it's typically we've been doing an iterative approach, right? So we drill one well and we change one thing to try to tweak it to get better production.
And 700 potential factors on a well.
And we continue to do this, and it's like the AI part of that is what can do that now without having to drill a single well. So you can start tweaking these inputs and these outputs, and it'll optimize what you should do from the very beginning. So from field development, parent-child, well spacing, stage spacing, all that can really be modeled now.
Yeah. And you bring up, Will, something that's interesting, or at least I find it somewhat exciting, on the service company side, actually, is that you all, on the service company side, can be the vanguard for a lot of this. Again, you go back to your ExxonMobil, you got a big staff, and maybe they figured that stuff out, although that hadn't been borne out necessarily in the shale plays. But in terms of smaller, mid-cap, small cap, private independents who don't have that capability there and have to rely on expertise. I mean, does a data solution like that, is there a Chevron solution versus an Exxon solution? Or do the service companies kind of move this forward, move the industry forward by providing, we've experimented, this is what we found, you know, it's not necessarily a software package or whatever, but here are some approaches, you know, that you can work into your current practices to improve what you do. The service companies then become the vanguard for moving the industry forward.
Yeah. The other exciting thing about this is that it's scalable, right? So we can cater a solution to a customer regardless of what size they are, you know, to their needs. What do they want? So it's all about, you know, again, communicating our capabilities and the operator communicating what their desires are, and then meeting in the middle and collaborating on that.
So I saw a comment one time that we'll know when the energy industry has made this transition when we see the CEOs up there pounding the podium saying we're not oil and gas companies, we're technology companies. But listening to you all talk, it sounds like you all, the service companies, are becoming the technology companies. And you know, that becomes the method or means through which the industry can move forward as a whole, all of those different operators out there. Any comment, final comments as we bring this to a close?
Yeah, I mean, with respect to that most recent comment, I think we're both technology companies. I think I've seen, you know, we call ourselves an energy technology company, and I've seen some other operators say that they're a technology company as well. I think we all innovate, and I think what you see now is that technology driving the energy transition, which is going to some of these Paris you know, objectives in 2050. And I know, you know, we as an organization have commitments for reducing carbon footprint and investing in alternative energies, hydrogen, you know, carbon capture, geothermal. So that's just to name a few. And I think that you see commitment from larger operators, your majors and super majors, to that as well.
Well, I want to thank you both for participating. Absolutely, it's been a fascinating conversation, certainly from my standpoint. We are at a very crucial juncture, as you know, in oil and gas. Energy transition is the right word for it. And we'll get there, but it's going to be through the work of individuals like yourselves. So thanks once again for participating in our program.
Thanks you very much.